You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome to this for your health or for the health of it. It is Thursday morning, April the 9th, and we're fortunate to have as our guest John Kennedy, not the president, not the senator.
The John.
John, John is going to talk to us about a technology called neuroplasticity. And if you remember last week, we talked about we had Maury Zelkovich on, and Maury talked about brain entrainment. I wanted to let I wanted to talk a little bit about what what's faced in bringing these kinds of technologies to market. One of the very first books I ever read in graduate school, and I actually read it, was something called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And it was written in and it was written in 1968. I read the book in 1971. And this was written by a professor from the University of Chicago. And he pointed out that very little progress is made in research because we have something called a paradigm. And the paradigm is like every 20 years. So the reason is we have this model that we have to go out and we have to do double blind studies and prove everything. And if you don't have that, then the research isn't any good. So here is I want to point out about the brain. I've been studying the brain and working with the brain since 1971. We knew that you could fix brains. Um, I knew that in 1976. I knew we could retrain the brain and reformat it around 1987. That we could actually take a person whose brain is seriously injured and put them back in the population. In 1990, the National Academy of Neuropsychology and the American Psychological Association said that the 1990s is um, the decade of the brain. And it's interesting that both you and Maury came around in 2007.
Mhm. Yeah.
In my work, I had been using subliminal hypnosis in my work using electricity and magnetics and the other things that went into it. Um, so I was happy to see what Maury was doing. I'm more excited. I'm equally excited to hear what you're doing
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
But so why don't you tell people about what you do? You're a neuroplastician. You
Yeah.
might start with how you got that name.
What that name? First of all, I want to say Maury's is awesome. I love the stuff that Maury's doing. He's way out there, really powerful stuff. So neuroplastician was actually goes back to kind of a little of my background. So I was not, and I definitely can highlight what you talk about the problems of the research cycle, right? As you know, research, peer review, there's no innovation. There's no room for innovation. It's people like us and Maury that we find something that works, we bypass and cut through all the regulatory stuff that's really now more and more funded by pharmaceutical companies, funded by people trying to, so research is not what it used to be. But basically, that name came from kind of my first contract with the Marine Corps. I was actually a process consultant, and I worked with a lot of big companies like Aon, Motorola. I had a gift for getting things back on track, making their operations more efficient. It was my brother in 2006 when he came back from Iraq that inspired me to maybe try to use my gifts, not just to help make more money, but also to save lives. Because back then, and still is pretty much the most dangerous weapon the enemy had was IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And so I did a lot of research into neuroplasticity because I knew I wanted to do something with the brain, wasn't quite sure what yet. Was at a Marine event in 29 Palms, California, and the whole purpose of that event was to bring contractors from around the world and expose us to as much about IEDs as possible. So they scared the crap out of us, blowing stuff up. We had the trail Marine, guides around simulated battlefield conditions. We had to look at all these different trigger devices that the enemy used. And all this information is coming in, and I wasn't quite sure how I could help, but I was shaking hands with the base commander, General Doug Stone, on the last day. And I just had one of these God wink serendipitous moments. And I just kind of had this vision. What if I could do for the brain what I do for operations? What if I could make the brain more efficient using neuroplasticity, which I had just started to read about as the medium? Now, the critical book for me, and I recommend this book to everyone, although they probably read it already, is Norman Doidge's the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. That's where they first realized that the brain wasn't fixed, we can change it. And he's the one who coined the term neuroplastician, because as a neuroplastician, and I've met several of the other people in his books, how I define neuroplastician, and Harvey, you probably would fit in this as well, but we're someone who uses something non-medical related, and we use neuroplasticity to create favorable changes in the brain. And so that's where the name came from. And then, for me, it was an amazing journey from the Marines. It spread to Navy SEALs and snipers and pilots. And the goal was to save lives in two different directions. One, improve the ability of guys going into combat to make better decisions under the most stressful of environments, which combat was, but also save lives by accelerating the recovery from the wounds of war, guys coming out of combat. And so two completely different aspects, but because everything flows through our brain, the same program helps both ends of that spectrum. And so that's how I got to this neuroplasticity, being a neuroplastician, basically helping people using neuroplasticity to change their brains exceedingly fast, to be more positive and powerful.
Tell me how your system works, how your approach works.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So basically, the goal is to do something that makes the brain work very hard in a short amount of time. And that's what creates what we call robust stimulation. Now, that was a critical research to me. I came this when I was trying to figure out how this. Here I am embedded with the Marines, right? I didn't have the time. I had to embed with them, which was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. It was a big, full DoD experiment. We had a control platoon of 40 guys. We had 40 guys that I was going to work with, my platoon. And I asked for the worst platoon in the battalion because I wanted to try to help these guys if I could. They lost 16 guys a cycle before, 3 attempted suicide, rampant post-traumatic stress, failing a lot of their important objectives. And so I got an opportunity to actually embed with them for 3 months. And the big test, what we did before and after cognitive skills tests, but the real world test would come at the end of those 3 months when they went through their final pre-deployment training before deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I knew I had to do something I knew what I wanted to do in the hypothesis, right? Improve the underlying cognitive skills that are critical to our performance, no matter where we are on our performance baseline. And so because I was a process guy, I created a framework of specific mental processes based on work from someone named Dennis Jenkins out of Australia. Because at the time, all the frameworks around cognitive ability were psychology based. So basically like learning ability or something, very vague. These are very specific. So analysis, breaking things down, synthesis, putting them together, direction, orientation, categorization, classification, pattern recognition, which is huge. So basically, I knew I needed to improve those somehow, and I knew it couldn't be digital. Digital interface is actually BS. I don't know, Cogmed, Lumosity, all those digital ones. You get better at the games, but they don't stimulate the real world. And we live in the real world. God made us analog beings, so they had to be analog, and they had to make executive function. Right? We wanted to stimulate decisions. So the way my program works, I use a couple of puzzles, but the basic one is just symbols on a piece of paper. It's the simplest thing. My daughter was 5 at the time when I developed it. I wanted her to be able to do it. And what I realized, again, I'm a consultant. I'm not a neuroscientist, although I've had many neuroscientists help me. I just experimented to get something to work. And with an agile approach, we kept improving it. So what I realized was, if we give the brain something really simple to do that it thinks is simple, but in order to do what we ask it to do, it has to work really, really hard using more parts of the brain. That's what creates the robust stimulation for instantaneous change. So the exercise use eyes, ears, mouth, hands, feet. We add a metronome. So we add continuous more load to the brain while the brain itself is making very, very simple decisions. So again, a 5-year-old can do it, a 95-year-old can do it. But in order to do that, every time we go a little bit, we go through the exercises, each one's a little bit harder than the one before, and that's what creates the brain changes. So the interface is simple. I work with people all over the world via Zoom. I do it in person. With the military, it was all in person, which I love, but now a lot of my work is over Zoom.
It's interesting that you talk about giving the brain things to do.
Yeah.
When I started off in this, I found that we worked with kids who were called minimal brain dysfunction. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't minimal if it was your brain, but that's another story. Um, and with those kids, we could basically use vitamins and minerals because this was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And we did psychoeducational remediation, which sounds very similar to what you were doing, but we didn't put the stress on the brain.
Well,
Um, Go ahead.
what's interesting, so I kind of look at, so neuroplasticity is always there. Everything we do, everything we think, is always changing our brain. And so my model kind of has 3 different levels of that based on what a computer might be. So the things that we do, so, a pitcher throws a ball 10,000 times. He gets better at it, right? They call it muscle memory, but it's really the brain that's remembering those connections. So those are like the applications of the computer. Now, the biggest area of most programs to improve the brain, I think you might be talking a little bit about this from the psychology area, is with the operating system.
Yes.
Right. So the operating system is huge. Operating system is everything flows through the operating system. And so that's why NLP, mindfulness, meditation, visualization, all those things deal with the operating system level of the computer. Very important. It can take a while sometimes. And you don't see a mind coach and you're fixed, right? It takes a while to practice because of neuroplasticity. And then where I operate just as the processor. So if you get a new computer, everything works better. Every single application and the operating system all work better and faster because the processor is better. So it doesn't compete with anything. It just kind of accelerates the results of any other improvement program. And that's why, athletics, I work with professional athletes. I work with people with brain trauma. Doesn't really matter, ADHD, autism, or even, almost any layer on that spectrum where people want to improve. When the brain is faster and more focused, they do better.
How do you see the processor working? How do you
Well,
see the operating system working?
Well, the operating system to me is our thoughts, right? So that's, we think things through, right? So we have, and again, everything from mindfulness to positive psychology to manifestation, you repeat your over and over again. Neuroplasticity is what makes it stick, and that's why you have to repeat them over and over again. So The operating system is a very important layer. Where I see the processor, it's almost like the processor in your computer. It doesn't matter what information is coming through, you're just making it faster. And in order to do it faster, you have to improve your focus. You have your ability to break information down and put it together. And again, the type of exercises are the ones based on this robust stimulation. So it changes fast. I can typically help anybody improve their processing speed, and we use a metric we validated for 15 years now, by 10 to 20% in an hour, right? I had someone on yesterday and it was like 30%. So when your brain is processing faster, everything else works better as well. All your psychology work you're doing, that's so important, that does better. If you're a baseball pitcher, you throw the ball better. Everything works better because your brain is faster.
You said that, did you say the brain was digital, or the brain is analog? Is that what you said?
Well, so we're analog beings, right? So, and I've actually spoken a lot in AI conferences about this, being analog in an AI world or AI in a digital world, because our world is increasingly digital, right? Because it's easier. We want to create tools. It's a lot easier to use Google Maps than it is to use a real map. But we have to understand that every time we relate, we put the mental work necessary to do something to a device to make it easier, the brain isn't doing the work. So we're analog. We have eyes, ears, mouth. We talk to each other. We have build relationships in an analog. In other words, that's not digital. The more we put over the digital, the more we're depriving our brains of that hard work. So it's kind of like the difference between driving to the store and walking to the store, right? If you drive to the store, you're there in 5 minutes. If you walk, you're there in 30 minutes. But what's happening? You're looking around, you're observing, you're learning. You might see a neighbor. All these things are happening to stimulate your brain's connections that you don't get when you're driving in a car. And that's just an example. But that's why the program is based on analog connections to the real world. That's why we engage eyes, ears, mouth, hands, feet, so that those connections are the ones that get stronger.
How do you see the difference between the mind and the brain?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's kind of how I see the mind is more the operating system and the brain is a processor. So the processor, so the mind, you have to think about things, right? And it doesn't matter what you're doing when you think about them, that's a filter. It's such an important layer. The mind is such an important layer. The brain is just it's agnostic, right? I mean, when you're faster, everything your mind does, everything your body does gets done better. But that's really where I kind of differentiate the two.
Well, okay. My view is the brain is digital.
Okay.
The brain can't do all the things it does in the analog. Analog is too slow, too slow.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. As far as because the brain is processing through electrical connections and
Right.
neurotransmitters and so forth. So yes and no, but the stimulation to the brain is analog, more
Yeah,
powerful.
that part is true,
Yeah.
but it's also an element of how strong the stimulus is. So when you give us an example of, say, when you work with a professional athlete.
Okay, so great example. So actually, one of my athletes, well, two of my favorites. One is the highest completion record quarterback in the Canadian Football League. Another one I'm working with right now, a couple times a week. She's a World Cup goalie preparing for the World Cup that's coming up. So when I meet with them, what we do is we always work with the brain first. So the exercises are designed to make the brain, the core processing of the brain, as fast as possible. And so we have a metric that we use, this performance metric that we use. We validated for 15 years. And the first time someone uses this, it's a speed of processing metric. They might take anywhere from a minute 20 to 2 minutes in that range. So my professional athletes with practice, they're down to 30 seconds. So the same amount of information that might have taken a minute or something else, they're doing in 30 seconds. So their brain is faster. And then we engage the parts of the brain that they use for their sport. So we definitely engage the hands. Two reasons we engage the hands was because the left side of the brain controls right side and vice versa. We want complete brain balance. So the exercises are designed to stimulate all four lobes, both hemispheres, and memory simultaneously. And wherever we stimulate the brain, that's where the connections get stronger and faster. And the beautiful part about our brain is it will rewire around damage to do what we need to do. Then we get their feet involved, right? So sports is feet. So, and then we actually integrate a sport-specific motion. So for my quarterback, we have him get into flow state because as our neuroscientists have validated, we can get someone into flow state very quickly with the exercises. But then we want to insert one of their motions. So for the quarterback, he'll be doing the exercise, get in a flow state and do a throwing motion. For my goalie, she'll dive or move to try to block a ball. And so once that becomes unconscious, then they don't have to think about it in a game. So the goalie, for example, most goalies practice, this much space in front of them, they can react without thinking about it. They have to consciously think to get beyond that. So with Kat Perez, my goalie, we've extended that automatic way out here through the training. So it only things outside of it to think about. So her reaction time is so much faster.
You know that you were talking about reaction time, and the hallmark of an injured brain. Now, the brain doesn't know how it got injured.
Yeah.
It doesn't know. But the hallmark is slowing process speed. That is the hallmark. Now, you can talk about how it got.
Hallmark, you say that's one of the symptoms of the brain
that is the main symptom.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, you can talk about how it got injured by looking at what you see in behavior. For example, if they've got a head injury, if they had a car wreck and a rear end collision, they're going to lose their sense of smell, or they're going to have to wear sunglasses. That's one of there's photosensitivity. But it would seem to me that your approach ought to be in every neurorehabilitation unit.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting about the processing because you're absolutely right, and we validated that is one of the symptoms of almost any kind of brain trauma is poor processing. Exactly what you said, and so typically, when we do our baseline, they're much slower. I mean, they might be 3 minutes or 4 minutes even to go through the basic metric. And I've got a chart I started collecting. And so I've got people with everything from ADHD to autism to strokes to dementia. And on that chart, we have the starting symptoms. And then I have their speed of processing drill. And as the speed of processing drill gets faster, the symptoms go away. So after just 5 weeks, I have this one chart after just 5 sessions, basically where they practice on their own. Almost all the symptoms are gone away, and there's a significant improvement in their processing speed. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's a great metric to see. In fact, lately with a later concussion, I'm actually using it as a symptom. So if an athlete has a time, say 35 seconds, if they suspect a concussion, it will be slower.
Absolutely.
Right? We're using it as a measure now. If they do have a concussion, the goal is to get it back to where it was before.
Or it could be poisoning. It could be neurotoxic chemical poisoning.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that does the same. And what it's doing is it's slowing down the connections, the electricity.
Yeah,
and
right.
So what you're doing is you're increasing that. I wonder if what you're doing is not increasing awareness.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And actually going back to what you just mentioned, so this latest research finds that our exercises actually increase the myelin sheath, which as you know is critical to that processing speed. But awareness is huge because we're improving peripheral vision, we're improving awareness. One of the things about awareness is your ability to process quickly and make decisions unconsciously that normally would slow you down. And probably talk about athletes, probably my favorite example of this is an Olympic skier I trained a few years ago who was going down the hill at 100 miles an hour. She said she can ski much faster without falling because she can see the snow conditions further out. Now, the snow is the same and her eyes are the same. But what's happening? Her awareness is improving because all the little micro decisions she has to make to stay on her feet are now unconscious, where it's much faster and more efficient than conscious. So she doesn't have to think about all the little micro decisions. She's looking out ahead of where she needs to go. And the brain now is taking care of everything else to get there.
So what you're doing is you're increasing the functionality of the brain, and you're also increasing the energy in the brain.
I would have to say the energy. I mean, people do the exercises, they get tired. In fact, we're now, based on latest research, after a brain training session, we recommend that they just sit quietly for a few minutes because that's when all the changes solidify. Long-term potentiation, the myelination, all those things. So yeah, and the brain does work really, really hard. Although what's ironic about that is because we're releasing dopamine and endorphins, most people actually laugh when they do the exercise, which is kind of fun. They laugh, they do them. All of a sudden they're tired. Sometimes people start yawning, and I say, that's okay, you can yawn. That's your brain working hard. And then they rest for a little bit, and then the changes are almost immediate in their life.
So you also, while you're creating these new connections, um, while you're creating these new connections, you're also increasing the electrical activity in the brain. Let me ask you a question. If you follow up with these people 5 or 10 years later, do they still have the same level?
Yeah, they do. It's interesting. So, our very early research found that these changes are permanent. They become the new baseline, though. So, people now expect this better behavior, which is great. I've had Marines from 15 years ago reach out to me and telling me how much this has helped them get through traumatic experiences, how much has helped them in their jobs, how much has helped in different things. And I'll do a quick baseline assessment of the processing speed just to see where they are. And they're all within a few seconds of where they were 15 years ago. Now, the other thing, it's interesting, based on what you just said, one of our neuroscientists from Harvard who went through this said he felt it was the most, this might be related to what you're talking about, what's the electrical. He said he felt this was the most powerful anti-aging program because it increases blood flow through the brain so significantly. And so what happens when we get older, the capillaries that feed our neurons dry out, we lose the neurons, lose our memory. So a lot of people actually sometimes can actually feel the pressure in their head. And we actually put an HEG on a 76-year-old man. HEG measures blood flow through the prefrontal cortex, and we can see a definite increase. What that means is that's just a sign of all the powerful connections that are being made because that draws blood to fuel all these different changes that are being
Yeah,
made.
I wrote that in the paper, and I can still show you the arrows in my back.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Yeah, yeah,
And I wrote that in the 1990s.
yeah, yeah,
That basically what we were doing that with PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic um, fields,
yeah,
and we were using that to treat a head injury and to treat depression.
yeah, yeah,
And they said, "Well, why does this work?" And I said, "Well, my belief is that you get people to heal by increasing blood flow because blood
yeah,
heals, and
yeah,
by having in the blood what's needed to make it heal."
yeah, yeah.
So they didn't like that very much.
No, but that's true. It's exactly true. Yeah,
Well, I know, and
yeah,
I had the documentation to show that.
yeah,
And the people that we treated with chronic pain and chronic fatigue and head injuries and whatever else.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we didn't use pharmaceuticals.
Right, Right. That's why they didn't like you, because they weren't making any money on it.
Yeah, yeah, it was more than not like.
Yeah.
Um, you know, here's the thing though. It's interesting that you say their mind still works. Now, I see the mind and the brain as totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're saying that the brain has the same processing problem or processing speed.
Well, so the brain actually controls the mind, at least from my perspective. I could be wrong, but because, and that's why, so when your brain is faster, what happens is you have more confidence. We've had tremendous success with depression, anxiety, those, because a lot of the why we get anxious, we get overwhelmed. Well, when the brain's not overwhelmed anymore, anxiety goes away. Why do we have
Right.
depression? Because we're our neuroplasticity, we're going down this downward slope and it's really hard to break out. But when you do the exercises, again, literally in an hour, you're feeling better, your confidence is up. And part of the program, the art, so there's art and science. Science is the exercises. The art, as you know, Harvey, as a practitioner, is how to do what when. And so part of the program always is to encourage people to do more than they think they can. So then and because the brain changes so fast, like within minutes, they're able to do that. Now their confidence is up and they're ready to take on the rest of the world too, because all these things are happening psychologically as well as from the brain. So that's why I think they're different, but I think they're very, very closely related.
So when you're changing the brain waves and the patterns, you're changing the way neurons fire.
Yeah, I think we're making them fire faster and
Well,
stronger.
in a different sequence also. How does what you do affect memory?
Oh, we've had great success with memory. Just
Does it
actually
improve it?
improves it, yeah, and for short-term memory and long-term memory, because we're rebuilding those connections. The other thing too, you mentioned brainwaves, which is interesting. So, neurofeedback is pretty popular. Neurofeedback, the goal is to get into the brain, alpha and theta. So a couple of years ago, I did this several times, several neurofeedback practitioners. I had them put an EEG on while they did my exercises. And they were all shocked that within a few minutes, they were getting down to alpha and theta, which is where they want to be. So there's so many powerful things happening. Again, one of my neuroscience, my favorite endorsement of all time was a neuroscientist from Northwestern. And I took her through the program. And she goes, "Oh man, you're increasing dopamine and endorphins." And then she said, "This never could have come from traditional research," which, as you know, because it's so reductionist in nature, this is so holistic, she said, "This must have come from God." I said, "Okay, I'll take that as an endorsement."
I,
Because it's,
I, I think that's where stuff like we do does come from.
yeah, I agree. I agree. It's so totally outside the traditional medical field, which, the thing about the brain, you probably noticed the same thing, is when people are struggling with brain trauma, because I had a big debate with a neurologist about this. A young man that I worked with had a very severe concussion, was at one of the top rehab centers in Chicago. After 3 months, he wasn't making much progress. So a friend of his, who actually I had helped overcome a lacrosse concussion, had me work with him. And so within 3 weeks, within 3 sessions, he passed his neuropsych test. He didn't even need to go to day anymore, at day training. So I talked to his neurologist, and his neurologist would not talk to me. The neurologist said, "We know the brain changes anyway. We don't need this." Well, the problem is our brains will only change as far as we push it, right? So if you have a traumatic brain injury, you're down at this level, you'll recover enough to do what you normally do, but you're not going to get back to where you were even beyond that without the stimulation to continue to stretch the brain.
I'm wondering when you talk to that guy, did he tell you the brain fixes itself in 6 months and
He,
then
he
it
said he
ends?
said the brain. Well, and here's the thing: is an neurologist. So he's got my client on a year program. So he's getting paid for a year,
Yeah.
regardless of what happens. So he was not interested in helping his patients heal in a month, right? Because
Oh
it's
God,
not
no.
money. There's no more money. So that's the biggest pushback. And I know you experience the same thing from traditional medical, pharmacological, all those different things. Is it's all about the money for them, and we're just trying to help people.
how can we add nutrition to your program?
I
Because my
think,
my my belief is,
yeah,
and Dr. Grant's belief, you cannot stay well unless you fix your gut.
I would agree 100%. I think that's so complementary. I mean, I can work with the brain, but you're right. If the gut's not, because there's more neurons in the belly and the gut than there are in the brain.
And
So,
more neurotransmitters are made in the gut than they are in the
yes,
brain.
yes, no, absolutely. I think nutrition. So the first thing, so nutrition and not medication is the critical thing. You probably experience the same thing. How many people I work with dementia that are on statins? No, you don't want to be on statins. Statins are the worst thing for your brain, and you don't need them for your cholesterol. So,
Right.
so we get them off of that, right? They also not good for the gut. So now, if you were to add, we would add something like you do, where we actually improve the gut health as well. I think that's huge for overall health. It's very important.
I have been working. My process is this. I believe in using for the people I see who are really they're diabetics, they're obese, they got heart problems. I believe in starting those people off with supplements. And
Yeah.
little packages. Here's one. Take one in the morning, one in the afternoon. It's easy. And then by the time we get 3 months out or 4 months out, we pretty much know what their body needs. They don't need the whole package. They just need pieces of it.
Right, right.
And so then I want to move to food.
Yeah,
And when you talk about food for the brain, you really talk about vegetables and plants and fruits and not so much meat and potatoes. Although meat's important, meat's coming back in vogue now. We now should eat meat a couple of times a week. So, um,
so
but there's certain things that you can eat. Blueberries. There's certain foods that are good for the brain.
yeah,
Uh, Legumes, greens, the colored fruit, EPA, DHA. And where can you get that? You can get that in seeds like chia seeds and flax seeds. So I would like to know how you could put that into a complement for your program and then see if that in and of itself doesn't increase their metric. Now, I don't think you have to worry about your athletes because they're there. And they may even be doing neurotherapy with the idea with keeping both sides of the brain working together. We were doing that in 1985, working with athletes, and it was then EEG biofeedback,
right,
and we would take the temporal lobes and make them work together. It was a thing called a rolling cardioid, and we get on there and we said make this work, and it helped. It was part of what we call then peak performance.
right.
But the average person out there isn't aware of the rest of their body. I mean, you're talking about their brain, but you also have to talk about the rest of their body. What happens when you get to be 50 and you're not digesting food like you should? Or what if you're not putting in B vitamins and that the body doesn't make? So, I would wonder about that.
Well, so one of the things, you're absolutely right about the whole body. So that's one of the reasons why my program has involved all parts of the body and brain. So we do use left brain, right brain. The athletes in particular, with anybody, but it's pretty much about focused on the brain. So that's why we get such results so fast. Now, I have no doubt that nutrition would help people's overall health for sure. I know Dr. Grant has a pretty amazing assessment where he can assess like all parts of your body and everything. It's pretty amazing. As far as diet, I try not to go down that path. I have a different philosophy on what's good to eat, what's not good to eat. Um, to me, the healthiest is grass-fed beef. You got everything you need there with along with some organic fruit, and you can pretty much provide everything you need. But the problem is, we both know, is that people eat junk, right? So for most people, whatever healthy diet they go on, it's going to be better than the junk food they're eating now. That's what is destroying their gut.
And I guess that leads to my question of if you work with these people and you increase their brain functioning,
Yeah.
what happens when they go to McDonald's and have a hamburger, French fries, and a milkshake?
Well, that's a good question. Now, fortunately, the physical changes we're making in the brain are permanent. So, but as you know, if they go eat a bunch of junk at McDonald's, they're going to have brain fog. They're going to, they can run through some exercises to help. But if I don't educate them on nutrition, I'd be happy to send them to you because I think that's an important part of that. Um, and quite frankly, I just take it for granted. I take it for granted that if people are going to invest in helping their brain health, they're also concerned about their food health and exercise. Exercise is huge for the brain, right? So those are
Absolutely.
very important things that they can be doing um, to do that. But
You know,
yeah,
I
I
went to
agree.
I went to a seminar that one of my brethren, PhD psychologist, put on, and his question was, does exercise help the brain function better? I I hear this stuff and I just shake my head. And yes, it helps because you're increasing blood flow to the brain. But here again, you were talking about the reductionistic, and he wants to know which exercise at which time
Yeah,
and how much of it is gonna help. And that's the problem with science.
yeah, right.
And you had to wait until you had quantitative EEG to really get into the work that you were doing or
Right.
you're doing that I was doing. I was fortunate that where I did my training, the chief of psychiatry was one of the people who started quantitative EEG and developed it. And
Yeah,
I happened again one of those. I happened to meet up with him in Melbourne, Florida, in 1988. Go figure.
yeah,
Um, and we ended up collaborating. I ended up working for him. I guess or working with him. I learned a great deal because he knew the brain and knew what happened, and
yeah,
I learned from him. But that science, see, here's the thing: you had to have the science developed so they could ask the questions.
yeah.
I asked the questions. There was no science, and they
Yeah.
said, "Well, you're an idiot." Okay, well,
Right.
I can show you. I can show you people. I was using electricity and magnetics to treat chronic pain,
Yeah.
and there
Yeah.
was a woman who had 2 years she laid in bed. Two
Wow.
years. I don't remember why, but she fell or something. And all she did was all the orthopod could do for her was give her pain pills.
Right. Right.
So she was on our program. She did the 2 weeks at home. She came in, and after the first week of the magnetics, pain was gone.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.
She goes back to her orthopod and she tells him what happened. And he says, "Oh, he didn't do that. The pain pills finally started working." Now,
Right. Right.
I just rolled my eyes at that. She knew
Yeah.
what happened,
Right. Right.
but that's the kinds of things we've got to do. We really have to um, we really have to get this stuff out, and it
Yeah.
can get out
Right.
now without the
Right.
FBI coming to see you.
Right. Right. Well,
So you want to do this? You want to see if there's any comments that people have?
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's happening is because of RFK and because of the COVID scam, people are more open to alternative health methods, which I think is important for that.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about RFK. He's got a worm in his brain, and they see it, and they see it on MRI.
Yeah.
He also sold heroin out of his dorm room at Harvard.
Yeah, that was a long
But
time
on the
ago.
other hand, he has helped change um, he has helped change the the zeitgeist.
Well, that's the
He
main
has
thing. He's making it okay to question
right.
medicine, which is huge. Yeah. When anytime someone says the science is settled, you know that they're not a scientist, right? Science is never settled
No, it can't be
by
because science is
definition.
always a way to it is a way to think and work and do
Right,
whatever.
right, right.
Okay, so anybody out there have any questions? Feel free to unmute. Comments, questions. Um, yeah, Mike.
Hey, I'll be on camera in just 1 second here.
Hey,
Well,
Mike.
good. Yeah, hey,
Good
John,
to
how
see you,
are you?
Mike.
Yeah, well, you'll see me in just 1 second. Sorry, it's camera
There you go.
issues. Okay. We spend so much time in front of this little box here, and I'm curious to see how that's affecting overall just there's this thing called brain hacking, and I swear that YouTube knows what I'm thinking. That if I think of a song, I think of a story, I think of a biography on somebody, and it just pops up on YouTube. I don't believe that to be real science, but the amount of mental interaction. So Elon actually wants to put crystals in our brains so we can mentally engage and interact. I,
Right.
I don't endorse that, but how do you kind of unravel the amount of digital infusion into our minds?
Well, I've got a son that teaches digital marketing at SMU, and he can probably explain why you hit on something,
Yeah, right,
and the next thing is it all comes up. That's all marketing.
right.
Um, as far as you thinking something and someone else picks up on it, like your wife, perhaps you've been married long enough, you think each other's thoughts. That's quantum physics, and that's kind of like where all of this is headed
Yeah.
in the interconnectedness that we're all interconnected. Now, as far as sitting in front, my view is it depends on how long you sit in front of the camera, um, if or in front of the screen. The problem really is sitting in front of the screen.
Right.
And I know I know that I wrote published something yesterday on biomechanics and how you can avoid getting injuries uh, in your hands and your feet and your hips and your back. And in it, I said you really should wear uh, blue light limiting eyewear. And they said, well, I don't know if that's true or not. Well, if you understand the physiology of what blue light does when it hits your retina, and your retina is your retina is a direct line to your brain. And so anything you can do to lower the the influence of negative stimulus, it's worth doing. And
It-
so yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that absolutely. And so that's from the body perspective, but even from the brain perspective, I for a while I was working a lot with trainers because they're on a screen 8 hours a day. And typical symptoms are, lack of focus, irritability, lack of memory, because that screen is just too shallow. So that's why the exercises are analog. So what they would do is they would put them in front of the screen, run through them for a few minutes every couple times during the day, because the screen itself. Now that's not what you're talking about, Mike, about the whole the intrinsic marketing that's built in there. This is just the effect of screens on your brain. I mean, Zoom fog. You remember Zoom zombies when everybody was locked down because of COVID? Guys would leave a meeting and they go out and have a car accident because the brain hadn't adjusted quickly from this interface to the real world interface. And that's really why it's so important that young kids, anyone under the age of 6 or 7, should never be on a screen. Obviously, they got to be on sometimes. There's something out of South Korea they found, they actually coined it, it's called digital dementia. They found that kids that started from a very young age, and the stupid parents put their, you see them on a stroller, they got a phone in front of the kids because they're too lazy to interact with their kids, right?
Digital
It's a
daycare.
babysitter. And that
Or
creates
it's babysitter.
Yeah, and that digital dementia is a real thing. And so up until the age of 6 or 7, our brains are exploding with connections. If you think about what a child has to do, speak, walk, balance, maybe ride a bike, learn, all those things are creating these powerful connections in the brain that are the foundation for the rest of our lives. And if they're not getting those connections built up until the age of 6 or 7 because they're looking at a stupid screen, then they're not going to have that. So they found that even in the early 20s, these kids had started to develop dementia because they weren't building those connections. And of course, just as bad. So our whole so that's kind of where this program is based on, is those initial connections determine our whole life, determine our personality, our ability to do anything. And so then we spend the rest of our life dealing with them, or in the case of our program and some of Harvey's stuff, we can actually improve them. But those basic connections are learned from interaction with the environment and modeling from adults. So interaction with an analog environment, that's the difference between playing Minecraft and playing with blocks. Minecraft, you're looking at a screen. Blocks, you're balancing him, you're learning project management, you throw one at your brother, he starts crying. You learn from interaction with the environment, and it's the same thing from modeling from adults. So parents, how many times you go by a playground, some kid want some attention, and mom or dad's looking at their phone doing stupid Facebook stuff, right? They're modeling bad behavior. So those critical early years are so important for raising kids. But actually, those same things apply to us even as adults.
Yeah, and it's important to play. I was a play therapist. My joy has always been working with kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Forever. And we would do play therapy. Now I didn't get and play with the kid, but the play allows the kid to be creative.
Yeah, right, right, right.
And we don't let that happen very much in our society anymore. And that's a shame.
Well, and we're all a little older, right? I mean, you've probably read about this. I mean, we were like the last generation to have unstructured play. I remember going out in the morning, coming back at night when my mom rang the dinner bell, right? What did that mean? That mean we had to figure out what to do all day long. And now kids are so regimented, they're so boxed in, they're not, as Harvey said, they're not developing the creativity that they need.
I want to go back, and John, I don't know whether it was something you said or Mike you said about putting the chips in our head.
Yeah, Mike said that. Yeah, yeah,
If the chips in your head are there to make your brain work in a way that it couldn't work, such as you had a brain injury and you couldn't move your hand, that's one thing. But there's a guy on the internet, and his name, this is really important. He has a series, and he talks about we are the last generation of true human beings, because they're putting this stuff, these chips in our head. Now we're also finding out, John, because of the work you're doing, how powerful the brain is.
Yeah, right.
And we
Right.
don't need the chips in our head.
Right.
We don't. But that, what you and I do, John, doesn't make money for the pharmaceutical. I know, here I go again.
Right. Right.
But we can do the same thing. We can do it with kind of what you do. We can do it with electricity. We can do it with magnetic fields. And we can maintain it with the right kind of diet and nutrition.
Yeah.
That's really what's important.
Yeah.
And it's going to take all of us to fight back and hold back. And that's something Bobby Kennedy is doing. He's making us aware. The problem is he's nuts. And he went in and just destroyed the CDC, the FDA. I mean, he just destroyed it. And that's a shame, because we are no longer looked upon as a leader in medical research. On the other hand, there was a lot of medical research that was done, and you all don't see this, that has since been retracted.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and one was autism.
Yeah.
One was autism, and I have a doctor friend of mine who has since passed away, and he was treating autistic kids, and and this was in the 90s. He believed that vaccines caused autism.
Yeah.
And I actually, then they don't. They've never been able to repeat that research.
Would
And
disagree with that.
what?
I would disagree with that. We can take that offline, but the latest research is that definitely the poisons they put in the vaccines lead directly to autism. So, so that's another discussion. We have to go on here, but and that's what RFK has done. He's forced them to look at the research that they buried for so long from the pharmaceutical companies. So,
Well, I'd have to read that research and
yeah, I
compare
can
it
say
and compare it to the research that I've read, especially the research in the British Journal of Medicine and
yeah.
Lancet. Well, it looks like our time is just about up. Anybody else have anything else they want to say? Well, tune back in 2 weeks. Thank you, John. Your
Yeah, thank
information
you,
is in the
Harvey.
chat.
Thanks, everyone.
I did have one, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Sure.
I want to find out what sleep apnea does to the brain, because I'm on sleep CPAP now, but it was getting pretty bad there for a while. So I want to find out what exactly effect that has on it.
Well, and Harvey may have some things to help with that. So basically, what when you're depriving the brain of oxygen, it's not good for the brain.
Right.
And Harvey, you may have more insight into that, but that's why it can be dangerous.
See, your sleep is the time when your body, when the little street cleaners come out and clean your brain up and clean your body, and they get rid of all the little stuff walking around. And if you're not sleeping, your body, particularly your brain, doesn't get rid of the waste,
Right.
the
Okay.
metabolic waste.
Right.
And that is why diet is also so important. Now, are you sleeping better with the CPAP?
Yeah, I am now. I got my best sleep last night. I've had it for about a week. My best sleep was last night, but because
And you know what? It takes some time.
Yeah. But I'm feeling I have more energy though. I've got more energy. I'm able to do more things, and so that's been a big step for me, is having more energy.
I will tell you, on the days that I do not use my CPAP, like if we're traveling someplace, I don't do as well.
That's what everyone's been telling me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really important because it's a continuous airflow, and some people need oxygen. Some people with their sleep apnea, they quit breathing. I'm one of those people. My father quit breathing. And you know, I didn't think I had sleep apnea, and they only had to look at my reading for about 15 minutes and go, yeah, you got a sleep apnea. And
Yeah.
and so that's wonderful science. That is where medicine has really come through and looking at how important sleep is.
Mm.
And it's the best thing you can do for your body, in addition to getting the nutrients in, because the nutrients are going to make your brain work better.
Yeah, I had to. I think you knew I was on that injection, but I got the new ones going 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Had to stop them because I couldn't eat, and my sugars dropped quite a bit, and I had a low blood sugar event, and I had to get off of it because it wouldn't let me eat anything. I just couldn't eat, so that was really causing me a problem with the my diet. So I'm reversing that now. I got off of it. I'm reversing it now, but it's been rough.
Okay.
But thank you for the information.
You're welcome, Susan. Well, guys, it's by the old clock on the wall. Those of you who are old enough, remember that. Those of you who aren't, okay. It's time to go. We'll be back in 2 weeks, which makes it the 23rd of April. And we hope you'll come and see us then. And we enjoyed, and this will be on our website, and it'll be on YouTube. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Harvey.
John, thank you.
It's great. Yeah, thanks, everybody. Great. I always love to spend time with you, Harvey. This is good.